She was abandoned on her first date. The Mafia boss at the next table couldn't stop looking at her. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It was a cool, crisp evening in New York City, and Emily was already running late. She had spent the last few hours getting ready for what she hoped would be the perfect date. A simple dinner at a local Italian restaurant, nothing fancy, but enough to spark a sense of excitement. After all, it was her first date in months, and she was eager to make a good impression. She adjusted her dress for the third time in the mirror and ran a hand through her hair before grabbing her purse and heading out. The restaurant was bustling, the warm glow of the chandeliers and the hum of lively conversations filling the air. Emily was a little nervous, but it was a good kind of nervous, the kind that comes with anticipation. When she arrived, she checked in with the hostess and was escorted to a quiet table in the corner. She waited for her date, checking her phone every few minutes, hoping he was on his way. He had seemed like a nice guy online, thoughtful, kind, and definitely attractive. But now, as the minutes passed and there was no sign of him, her excitement began to turn into doubt. After 20 minutes, she began to feel an uncomfortable tightening in her chest. Where was he? Had something come up? Was she being stood up? Her thoughts were interrupted when the waiter brought over a glass of wine, a small gesture that only deepened her sense of discomfort. Just as she was about to text him to check in, her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from him. Sorry, I got caught up with something, but I can't make it tonight. Hope we can reschedule. Emily felt her heart sink as she read the message. She stared at the screen for a moment, disbelief washing over her. He was canceling on her at the last minute? Without any explanation, and after all the effort she had put into this evening? She let out a small sigh and looked around the restaurant, trying to make herself feel better by focusing on the ambience. That's when she noticed him. He sat at the next table, alone, his posture relaxed but with an aura of quiet power that made him stand out from everyone else. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing an impeccably tailored suit that seemed to belong in another world. His dark hair was styled effortlessly, and his intense eyes seemed to pierce through the room, scanning everyone with careful precision. But what caught Emily's attention wasn't just his striking appearance. It was the way his gaze kept drifting towards her. At first, she thought it was her imagination, but then, it became clear. He was watching her, not in the way someone casually glances at another person in a crowded restaurant, but in a way that suggested he was deeply intrigued. She shifted in her seat, feeling a sudden rush of warmth creep up her neck. What was he staring at? Did he know she had been stood up? Did he feel pity for her? As she shifted her gaze, their eyes met for the briefest moment. His gaze was unwavering, steady, as if he were studying her every move. She quickly looked away, her face flushing. But the feeling of his eyes on her didn't leave. She felt an odd mixture of discomfort and curiosity, unsure whether to confront it or just pretend it wasn't happening. But when she stole another glance at him, she saw that his attention had not wavered. He was still looking at her, and this time, there was something else in his eyes. Something deeper. Something almost predatory. She quickly turned her attention back to the menu in front of her, hoping that if she ignored him long enough, he would lose interest. But deep down, she knew she couldn't escape the feeling that something significant was about to happen. Little did she know, the evening had just taken an unexpected turn. After the brief moment of eye contact, Emily could no longer ignore the strange intensity of the man across the room. She tried to push the thought out of her mind, but it lingered. In her thoughts like an unanswered question. Why was he staring at her so intently? Was it just her imagination, or did he truly find something in her that he could not look away from? She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her eyes darting around the room, hoping to distract herself. She checked her phone again, still no response from her date. She had been left there, abandoned in the middle of what should have been a fun night. The disappointment was palpable, but so was the tension in the air. The man, the one with the intense gaze, was still there, sitting in the same spot, his dark eyes not leaving her for a second. Emily felt the pressure building inside her chest. It was as if the universe had conspired to make her feel small, invisible, and insignificant. A sudden rush of frustration took over. She wasn't going to let this man make her feel even more uncomfortable. But no matter how hard she tried to ignore him, she couldn't help but notice his presence. It was magnetic, almost unsettling. Just when she was about to look away for the 100th time, he stood up. His movements were smooth, deliberate, and almost predatory. He made his way toward her table with the quiet grace of someone who was used to being in control of every situation. Emily felt her heart skip a beat, her palms growing clammy. She was caught off guard when he stopped at her table. "I noticed you were left alone," he said, his voice deep and rich with an accent that immediately caught her attention. His words were casual, yet there was a certain weight to them. She looked up at him, still unsure of what to say or how to respond. "Is something wrong? Are you okay?" His gaze softened for just a moment, and Emily almost felt a strange comfort in his concern, even though she didn't know him at all. She nodded, though her lips felt dry. "I'm fine, thank you," she managed to say. He studied her for a moment longer, his dark eyes never leaving her face. "It's a shame," he said quietly, "to be alone in such a beautiful place." His voice had a strange mix of kindness and authority, making her feel both nervous and oddly safe at the same time. Emily quickly turned her gaze down to her half-empty glass, trying to regain some sense of control over the situation. "It's just a bad night," she said, attempting to brush off the awkwardness. "I understand," he said, not pressing any further, though his eyes never strayed far from her face. "But I have a proposition." Emily raised an eyebrow. A proposition? This night had already gone from disappointing to strange, but something in his demeanor made her curious despite herself. "What kind of proposition?" she asked cautiously, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why don't you let me buy you a drink? At least you won't have to finish your night alone," he said, offering a small, almost teasing smile. Emily hesitated. Something about him told her she should be careful. His presence was overpowering, and the way he looked at her made her feel like she was an open book to him. "I don't think that's necessary," she said, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts to sound confident. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied her with that unnerving focus, as if he were piecing together some puzzle in his mind. After a few moments, he spoke again, his voice now softer but laced with something deeper, something more persuasive. "I insist," he said simply, his words almost a command. Emily felt an unexpected shiver run down her spine. There was something magnetic about him, something dangerous. She glanced at the waiter who had been watching from a distance, waiting for her decision. The staff had always been polite, but the waiter's eyes lingered on her in a way that made her feel vulnerable, as if they were all aware of the unusual encounter unfolding before them. "Fine," she said finally, giving in. She wasn't sure why, but something in his gaze made her feel like it was better not to resist. "A drink won't hurt." He smiled again, but this time, it was different, genuine, almost comforting. "Good," he said. "Let's make sure your night ends better than it started." As he gestured for her to follow him to a quieter part of the restaurant, Emily felt a strange mixture of emotions swirl inside her. She was still unsure of this man, of what he wanted, but at the same time, there was a strange sense of excitement, of anticipation building in her chest. As she walked beside him, she couldn't help but wonder, who was this man really? And why couldn't she shake the feeling that this was no ordinary encounter? As Emily followed him to the quieter part of the restaurant, she couldn't help but feel a mixture of confusion and curiosity. What was it about this man that made her feel so drawn to him, yet so uneasy at the same time? He moved with purpose, his every step confident, as if he owned the place. The staff seemed to recognize him immediately, giving him subtle nods of acknowledgement, their faces showing a respect that was almost reverent. She couldn't help but feel a sharp contrast between him and the world she came from. The world of waiting tables, balancing school, and the struggle to get by. The world of him, clearly one of wealth, power, and influence. They reached a private table tucked away from the rest of the restaurant. The candlelight flickered softly, casting shadows that seemed to emphasize the distance between them. As they sat down, the Mafia boss leaned back in his chair with a calm, yet imposing presence. Emily felt her heart race again, but this time, she couldn't tell if it was due to the lingering frustration of being stood up or the growing tension between her and this stranger. He studied her for a moment, his eyes scanning her features as if trying to read something deeper. "I have to admit, I didn't expect to see you alone tonight," he said, his voice smooth, with a slight edge to it. "You deserve better than being abandoned by someone like him." Emily hesitated, unsure of how to respond. She wasn't used to people, let alone strangers, offering such open sympathy. "It's not the first time," she replied quietly, staring into her wine glass. "But I'm used to it. I guess it's just part of my life." She looked up at him, suddenly feeling vulnerable. He gave a small nod, acknowledging her words. "A woman like you," he started, "should never feel abandoned. You deserve more than that." The way he said it, with such conviction, made Emily feel something stir inside her. It wasn't just his wealth or his looks. It was something about the way he carried himself, the way he spoke, as if he knew exactly what she needed without even having to ask. She shook her head, trying to dismiss the thoughts swirling in her mind. "I don't know if I believe that. Maybe I just get used to it," she said softly, trying to push the vulnerability away. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. "I don't think you should have to get used to it," he said. His voice was calm, but filled with an underlying intensity. "There's always a choice, you know. You don't have to live like this." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't tell if he was just being polite or if he genuinely believed what he was saying. She couldn't decide if it was the most comforting thing anyone had said to her or the most terrifying. "And what would you suggest?" she asked, her voice shaky despite her best effort to remain composed. He smiled, a slight curve of his lips that held no warmth, only a certain knowing. "I suggest you stop settling for less," he said. "You deserve a life where you're not second best, where you're the one who calls the shots, where you don't have to constantly fight to be seen." Emily took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words. She didn't know whether she should feel flattered or afraid. No one had ever spoken to her this way before. She had always kept her head down, done what was necessary to survive, never really allowing herself to dream of anything better. But his words, they felt like a challenge. A challenge she wasn't sure she was ready to accept. "I don't know if that's possible for someone like me," she said, more to herself than to him. "I don't have the luxury of thinking about what I deserve." "And why not?" His question was direct, almost forceful. "Why do you think your worth is tied to what you can give others?" Emily froze. She had never thought about it that way before. She had always defined herself by how much she could give, by the effort she put in to make sure others were happy. She had spent so much time trying to please everyone else that she had forgotten to ask herself what she needed. "Because that's just how life works," she replied, almost automatically. "You give, and you get what you get in return. That's all there is." The Mafia boss tilted his head, as though considering her answer. "I don't believe that," he said, his voice quieter now. "I believe that life is about power. And right now, you have the power to change your story. You just need to believe that you can." Emily felt the weight of his gaze once again. His words lingered in her mind, and for a moment, she allowed herself to entertain the idea. What if he was right? What if she didn't have to settle for the life she had? What if there was a way out, a way to take control? But before she could ask herself more questions, the moment was broken by the sound of her phone buzzing in her pocket. She reached for it, and when she saw the name on the screen, her stomach dropped. It was her date. No, her ex-date, calling. She looked at the screen for a moment, torn between answering and ignoring him. But when she looked up at the Mafia boss, his gaze was steady, unwavering. It was like he knew exactly what she was thinking. And in that moment, she realized that the choice was hers to make. Emily sat frozen for a moment, staring at her phone as it buzzed with the message from her ex-date. It was like a cruel reminder of what had just happened. He was asking if they could try again, apologizing for the sudden change of plans. She felt a flicker of anger and frustration. How typical of him, she thought. And yet, there was still a part of her that longed for the closure, to make sense of the wasted time. But before she could decide whether to respond, the man across from her, the Mafia boss, spoke again, his voice calm but firm. "I see you're still thinking about him," he said. His words hung in the air, heavy and direct. Emily looked up, her heart racing. She hadn't realized he had been watching her so closely, but now, his gaze was unwavering, his eyes sharp and intense. "I don't want to think about him," she replied softly, her voice barely a whisper. "But it's hard to forget when it's all I've known." The Mafia boss leaned back in his chair, studying her with a look of understanding that was unsettling in its depth. "You've been letting someone like him control your life for too long," he said. "You don't have to keep giving him that power." Emily felt a rush of emotions, a mixture of anger, confusion, and something else that she couldn't name. She knew he was right, but how could she let go of everything she had built her life around? How could she just walk away from the past? "It's not that simple," she said, shaking her head. "You don't understand." "I understand more than you think," he replied, his tone gentle but insistent. "I understand that you've been settling for less than you deserve. And I understand that it's time to stop." His words pierced through the wall she had built around herself, and for the first time that night, Emily allowed herself to consider what he was saying. What if she didn't have to settle? What if she could take control of her own life? The thought was terrifying, yet strangely liberating. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm not asking for anything," he said, his gaze softening. "I'm just giving you a choice." Emily stared at him, unsure of what to say next. The weight of the situation was overwhelming. She had always believed that life was about sacrifice, about putting others first. But this man, he was offering her something different, something she had never even imagined. "You don't know me," she said, her voice growing more confident. "You don't know what I've been through, what I've had to do to survive." The Mafia boss looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without saying a word, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a business card. He placed it gently on the table in front of her. "Call me when you're ready to stop surviving," he said quietly. "When you're ready to start living." Emily's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the card. She knew he was offering her something that would change her life, but was she ready to take that step? Was she ready to leave behind everything she had ever known and embrace a new path? She glanced at the card, her fingers trembling as she reached for it. The name on the card was simple, yet powerful: Adriano Moretti. There was no mistaking it. This man was someone of great influence, someone who could offer her more than she had ever dreamed of. But the question remained, could she trust him? Could she trust herself to make the right choice? As the night wore on, Emily found herself lost in thought, the weight of her decision hanging heavily on her shoulders. She knew that this was a turning point, a moment in time where everything could change. But what if she wasn't strong enough to face what was ahead? What if, in seeking something better, she lost herself in the process? Adriano's voice broke through her thoughts again. "You can walk away if you want, but I'll be here, waiting for you when you're ready to choose a different life." Emily didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, she realized something. She had a choice. It wasn't about waiting for someone else to decide her fate anymore. It was about taking control. The decision, for the first time in her life, was hers to make. And for the first time in a long while, she felt something inside her stir, a spark of hope, of possibility, that perhaps she could change her story after all. Emily sat in the quiet of her apartment, the business card from Adriano Moretti lying in front of her. The name alone carried a weight she wasn't sure she could bear. Adriano Moretti, the man who had offered her an escape from her life, from the mundane and the ordinary, into something much darker, yet more intriguing. For the past few hours, she had debated whether or not to call him. Her heart raced each time her thoughts returned to him, and the possibilities he had presented to her. A different life. A life where she wasn't just getting by, but actually living. But there was a part of her, a very strong part, that was terrified of taking that first step. She was used to being the one who took care of everything, the one who made the sacrifices, the one who never asked for help. It wasn't easy for her to let go of that control, to trust someone else, especially someone like Adriano Moretti. The phone sat in her hand like a lifeline, its screen reflecting her indecision. She hadn't spoken to him since that night, but he had made his intentions clear. He wanted to help her, or rather, he wanted to offer her a life that she could never have imagined. But at what cost? She knew who he was. The Mafia boss. The man who controlled everything around him with an iron fist, who made deals in the shadows, and who didn't take no for an answer. She had seen the power in his eyes that night, and she had felt the weight of his words. He wasn't like the men she had known before. He wasn't just a wealthy businessman. He was something else entirely. But she also knew that his world came with dangers. A world of power and influence, of secrets and lies, where nothing was ever as it seemed. She had heard the rumors, seen the stories, and she knew that getting involved with someone like him could change everything. But was she ready for that change? Was she ready to let go of her safe, predictable life and step into something unknown? She thought about her life, the endless work, the struggle to make ends meet, the loneliness that seemed to follow her wherever she went. Was that all she was destined for? Or could she take a chance on a new beginning? She couldn't deny the allure of the life he had offered her, but it scared her. And yet, there was something else, something deeper, that drew her in. It was the promise of freedom, the promise of living without fear of the next bill, of the next disappointment. Adriano had seen her, really seen her, and that was something she had never experienced before. He had made her feel like she mattered, like she wasn't just another person blending into the background. She hadn't realized how much she craved that feeling, how much she longed for someone to see her for who she truly was, not just for the role she played. As her mind raced, the decision became even more difficult. But then, she thought about the life she had been living. The man who had abandoned her on her first date. The man who had never truly seen her. She had spent so long trying to please others, trying to make everyone around her happy, that she had forgotten what it meant to be happy herself. Adriano had given her a chance to change that. He had given her a chance to live for herself. And deep down, she knew that she couldn't keep living the way she had been. She couldn't keep making excuses or waiting for someone else to change her life. If she wanted something different, she had to take the first step. She took a deep breath, her fingers trembling as she dialed the number on the business card. The phone rang, each second stretching out like an eternity. Then, the voice on the other end answered. "Hello, Emily," Adriano said, his voice smooth and confident. "I'm glad you called." The warmth in his voice made her heart race, but this time, it wasn't with fear. It was with something else. Something she hadn't felt in a long time. "Hope. I'm ready," she said, her voice steady, despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "I'm ready to see where this leads." Adriano didn't respond immediately, but she could hear the smile in his voice when he spoke again. "Good. We'll make sure you never look back." As they ended the call, Emily felt something inside her shift. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt alive with possibility. She had made her choice, and whatever came next, she would face it on her own terms. The days that followed Emily's call to Adriano were a blur. Her life, which had been one of routine and quiet frustration, suddenly seemed full of possibilities she had never dared to consider. The moment she had stepped into his world, everything had shifted. Adriano's world was a far cry from her small apartment in Queens. It was a world of power, influence, and wealth. But it wasn't just the material things that drew her in. It was the confidence, the control, the way Adriano seemed to know exactly what he wanted and how to get it. He made her feel important, as if her existence mattered, as if she could be more than just another face in the crowd. She had spent years trying to survive, to get by, never allowing herself to dream. But now, for the first time, she was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have more. Adriano's offer wasn't just about money or status. It was about changing her life, about giving her the freedom to make her own choices. It was a chance to stop being a victim of circumstance and start being the one who dictated her own future. And she found herself wanting that, more than she had ever wanted anything. Her first meeting with Adriano after the call was scheduled for the following week. He had arranged for her to meet him at a private club in the heart of Manhattan, a place she had only ever heard of in whispers. The club was everything she had imagined and more. As she walked through the grand entrance, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the world on her shoulders. But there was also something else, an undeniable excitement. This was a world she didn't know, but one that she was ready to explore. She had chosen to take the plunge, and now there was no turning back. As she entered the club, she was immediately struck by the luxurious atmosphere. The chandeliers sparkled like diamonds, casting soft light over the marble floors. People in designer suits and gowns mingled in the grand lobby, their conversations laced with a sense of importance. Emily felt out of place, like an imposter in this world of opulence. But then she saw him. Adriano stood across the room, talking with a group of men. His presence was magnetic, commanding attention without effort. He turned his head as soon as she walked in, and their eyes met across the crowded room. He smiled, and in that moment, Emily felt a surge of warmth flood through her. It was as if, for the first time in her life, someone was genuinely happy to see her. "You made it," Adriano said as he approached her, his voice calm, but with an edge that made her heart race. His dark eyes softened as he looked at her, and for a moment, she forgot about the grandeur of the club, the people surrounding them, and the life she had left behind. It was just the two of them, standing there in that moment. "I wouldn't miss it," she replied, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. Adriano reached out and gently took her hand, leading her to a private table in the back of the club. The air was thick with tension, but also something else, a sense of possibility. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was like he was studying her, understanding her in a way that no one else ever had. The conversation flowed easily, and for the first time in a long while, Emily found herself laughing, her worries melting away as she got lost in the moment. Adriano had a way of making her feel like she was the most important person in the room, as if everything else in the world had stopped when she walked in. The night passed quickly, and before she knew it, the evening had come to a close. As they left the club, Adriano turned to her and said, "I'm glad you came. I hope you see the possibilities now." Emily nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "I do," she said quietly, her voice full of conviction. "I think I finally see them." Adriano smiled, a look of approval in his eyes. "Good," he said, his voice low and reassuring. "Because this is just the beginning. The world is yours for the taking, Emily. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." As she stood there, staring at him, she realized that this was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment where she could take control of her life, where she could finally be more than just a survivor. She could be the architect of her own destiny. And with Adriano by her side, she knew that anything was possible. After that night at the club, Emily felt like everything had changed. What she had once considered an ordinary life now felt suffocating, almost too small for the person she was becoming. Adriano's presence lingered in her thoughts like an unspoken promise. For the first time in years, she felt as though she was standing at the edge of something vast, something that could give her the life she had always dreamed of but never dared to reach for. Over the next few days, the weight of that decision hung over her like a thick fog. Adriano had given her the opportunity to step into his world, a world that was far removed from her own. But as tempting as it was also terrifying. She had spent so long living in survival mode that the idea of stepping into something unknown, something dangerous, felt like a gamble she wasn't sure she was ready to take. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Adriano. "I want you to meet me tomorrow. I have something important to discuss." That was all it said. No pleasantries, no explanation. It was clear that Adriano was a man who didn't waste time with formalities. Emily stared at the message for a long moment, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Part of her wanted to say no, to continue living the life she knew, even if it was ordinary and uninspiring. But another part of her, the part that had been awakened by Adriano's words and his presence, felt something stirred deep inside. Could she really let go of everything she knew to follow him into the unknown? Could she trust herself to make this leap? She had no answers, but the thought of remaining in her safe little world felt more like a prison than a sanctuary. The next evening, she found herself standing outside a tall, imposing building in Manhattan. The address was unfamiliar, but the security guard at the door immediately recognized her. "Ms. Emily, Mr. Moretti is expecting you," he said, nodding toward the elevator. She didn't say anything, just stepped inside, her heart pounding with anticipation. As the elevator doors closed, she felt a mixture of excitement and fear. She was about to step into a world she didn't belong to, a world where rules were different, where power and influence ruled everything. The elevator stopped on the top floor, and when the doors opened, Emily was greeted by a lavish suite that took her breath away. The view of the city skyline was breathtaking, the lights stretching as far as the eye could see. But it wasn't the view that captured her attention. It was Adriano, standing by the window, his back to her. He turned as soon as he heard the door open, and his gaze immediately locked with hers. "You came," he said, his voice low, filled with an emotion that she couldn't quite place. "I wasn't sure you would." Emily took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I almost didn't," she admitted. "But I realized I couldn't keep living the way I was. I'm ready to see what comes next." Adriano's expression softened, and for a moment, he looked like a different man, a man who was not the feared Mafia boss, but someone with a genuine interest in her. "I'm glad," he said quietly, walking toward her. "You don't know how much it means to me that you're willing to trust me." "I don't know if I can fully trust you yet," Emily replied, her voice steady, but tinged with uncertainty. "But I'm willing to take the chance." Adriano smiled, and there was something in his eyes that made her heart race. "That's all I ask," he said. "Trust is earned, not given freely. But I promise you, I will earn yours." As he led her deeper into the suite, Emily couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. This was a different world, one she had never imagined she would be part of. But now, standing in front of him, she realized that this was the world she had been waiting for. She had spent so many years holding herself back, afraid of what might happen if she dared to step outside her comfort zone. But now, with Adriano beside her, she felt like she was finally taking control of her own fate. They sat down to discuss the terms of her involvement in his world. Adriano made it clear that she was not just another pawn in his game. He wanted her to have a voice, to make decisions alongside him. He offered her the chance to work with him, to learn about his empire, and to be an active part of it. It was a lot to process, but the more Emily heard, the more she realized that this was exactly what she had been searching for. A life where she wasn't just surviving, but truly living. As the night wore on, Adriano's words resonated with her. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one where she could finally take control of her destiny. And as they spoke, Emily felt a shift deep inside her. This wasn't just about the life Adriano was offering. It was about the life she was finally ready to take for herself. Emily had never imagined that her life would change so drastically in such a short period of time. A week had passed since she had agreed to step into Adriano's world, and already she was beginning to see her old life as something that belonged to another person, another version of herself. The decision she had made that night had set a new course, one filled with challenges, but also possibilities. She was learning quickly that this world, Adriano's world, was not for the faint of heart. She had spent her days getting accustomed to the rhythm of his empire, shadowing him as he worked, meeting key players in his organization, and slowly starting to understand the depth of what he controlled. It was more than just money and power. It was the pulse of a city, the undercurrent that kept everything moving. The more she learned, the more Emily realized how much she had underestimated him. Adriano was a master at reading people, at knowing exactly what they wanted, and more importantly, what they feared. He had an uncanny ability to get what he wanted, whether it was through subtle persuasion or sheer force of will. But it wasn't just his control over the world around him that fascinated her. It was the way he made her feel. With him, she didn't feel small or invisible. He made her feel powerful, like she had the potential to do things she had never even imagined. But that didn't mean things were easy. Emily's first real test came sooner than she expected. Adriano had invited her to a meeting with one of his closest associates, a man named Salvatore. He was older, sharp-eyed, and spoke with the kind of authority that made the room feel smaller the moment he entered. Emily had no idea what the meeting was about, but it was clear that it was important. As the conversation went on, she could feel the tension in the room building. Adriano was calm, his voice steady as he navigated the delicate negotiations, but Emily could sense that something wasn't right. She had learned to trust her instincts, and right now, every fiber of her being was telling her that this was more than just a business deal. Salvatore was pushing for something, and Adriano wasn't about to let him take control. But Emily didn't know what it was. She sat quietly, listening, trying to read between the lines. Then, suddenly, the tone of the conversation shifted. Salvatore made an offer that was dangerously close to crossing a line Adriano had warned her about. He was testing Adriano, pushing him to see just how far he could go. That was when Emily knew it was time to speak up. She had never imagined herself in a position where she could challenge someone like Salvatore, but there she was, looking him in the eye, her heart pounding in her chest. "That's not the deal we made," she said, her voice surprisingly steady for the fear she felt. Salvatore turned to her, his eyes narrowing. "And who are you to question me?" he asked, his voice sharp. Adriano's gaze flicked to Emily, but he said nothing. It was as if he were waiting to see how she would handle the situation. "I'm someone who understands the value of keeping promises," Emily replied, her voice firm, but calm. She didn't know where the courage came from, but she wasn't going to back down. Salvatore chuckled, clearly amused by her response, but there was something dangerous in his smile. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," he said, leaning back in his chair. "But remember, in this world, guts don't always win." Adriano spoke then, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. "Enough," he said, his tone commanding. "We're not doing this the way you want, Salvatore. If you can't accept that, then we're done here." Salvatore's eyes flicked between the two of them, and for a moment, it seemed as though he might push further. But then, with a small nod, he stood up and walked out of the room, leaving Adriano and Emily alone. Emily exhaled, her body tense, but her mind racing. She had just faced down one of Adriano's closest associates and survived. She hadn't backed down, hadn't let fear control her. And in that moment, she realized something important. She was no longer the woman who had been abandoned on her first date, the woman who had been afraid of taking risks. She was becoming someone new. Adriano turned to her, a slight smile playing at the corners of his lips. "You did well," he said, his voice low. "I knew you had it in you." Emily met his gaze, her heart still pounding from the confrontation, but also filled with a sense of pride. "Thank you," she said, her voice quieter now, but stronger than before. Adriano's smile widened, and he took a step closer to her. "You've just earned my respect, Emily. And I'm not the only one who's watching you." The weight of his words hung in the air between them. Adriano's world wasn't just a place of power, it was a place where every move, every decision, was watched and judged. But now, for the first time, Emily knew she could hold her own in that world. And no matter what came next, she was ready to face it head-on. After that tense meeting with Salvatore, Emily couldn't help but feel a rush of adrenaline. She had stood her ground and earned Adriano's respect. But what did that really mean? She had only known him for a short time, and yet, her life felt completely different. She was no longer the woman who had been stood up on her first date, sitting alone, unsure of herself. No, she had learned quickly that the life Adriano offered her wasn't just about money or power. It was about survival, dominance, and living a life on her own terms. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Adriano began to show her the ropes, introducing her to key figures in his world, and slowly but surely, she began to understand the depth of what she was involved in. It wasn't just about business meetings or making deals, it was about managing people, situations, and, most importantly, managing power. Adriano took her under his wing, teaching her the subtle art of negotiation, the importance of reading people, and the power of silence. Sometimes, the best way to control a situation is to say nothing at all, he had told her one evening as they sat together in his office, the city lights shimmering through the window. Let them talk, let them believe they're in control. And when they've revealed all their cards, you make your move. Emily was learning faster than she had ever imagined. Each day, she felt more capable, more confident, and more connected to the life Adriano was offering her. But with each new lesson came a deeper understanding of the sacrifices that came with it. Adriano's world wasn't easy. It wasn't glamorous in the way the media made it seem. The people around him, his associates, his allies, they were not the kind of people Emily had ever interacted with before. They were ruthless, calculating, and often deadly. She had seen things that had made her stomach turn, heard stories that had made her question whether she was cut out for this life. But every time she doubted herself, Adriano was there to remind her why she was in it. "You don't get to decide what's easy," he had told her during one of their conversations late at night. "You only get to decide what you want. And you're not someone who settles for less." His words had stuck with her. It was true. She wasn't someone who had ever been satisfied with just getting by. And now, with Adriano's guidance, she was beginning to see that she could be more than just a survivor. She could thrive. But as Emily got deeper into Adriano's world, she realized that the stakes were much higher than she had ever imagined. One afternoon, as they were wrapping up a meeting with a potential business partner, Adriano pulled her aside. "There's something you need to understand," he said, his voice low and serious. "The people in this world don't play by the same rules as everyone else. They don't care about your morals or your values. They care about what you can do for them. And if you can't deliver, they'll make you wish you had never crossed their path." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. She had always thought of herself as someone who could handle difficult situations, but this world, The world Adriano was a part of was far more dangerous than she had anticipated. She had already seen enough to understand that loyalty and trust were earned through power, not kindness. "I'll be ready," she said, her voice steady, even though she could feel the weight of his words pressing on her. "I'm learning fast, Adriano." He gave her a long look, as though weighing her words. "I know you are. But remember, power comes with a price. And the higher you rise, the harder it will be to stay on top." His warning hung in the air between them, but instead of feeling scared, Emily felt something else. Determination. She wasn't going to let fear control her anymore. She had already made the choice to live a different life, a life that was hers to control. Later that evening, Adriano asked her to accompany him to another high-stakes meeting, one that would test everything she had learned. The room was filled with men in dark suits, their eyes cold, calculating. Adriano introduced her to them as though she were just another piece of the puzzle, but she could tell they were watching her, appraising her. For the first time since joining his world, Emily felt the full weight of the life she was now part of. As the meeting wore on, she watched as Adriano negotiated effortlessly, using his charm, his authority, and his sharp mind to secure a deal that would benefit him immensely. Emily felt a sense of pride as she observed him. He wasn't just a mafia boss, he was a strategist, a master of his domain. And she was learning from the best. But as the night drew to a close, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There was a tension in the air, a danger that hadn't been there before. As they left the meeting, Adriano's expression darkened. "Something's coming," he muttered under his breath. "I can feel it." Emily looked up at him, her heart racing. "What do we do?" He glanced down at her, his eyes narrowing with determination. "We prepare for it. Whatever it is, we'll face it together." In that moment, Emily understood the gravity of what she had joined. There was no turning back now. She was in it, for better or worse. And as terrifying as it was, she was ready to face whatever came next. After their last meeting, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Adriano had been right. The higher she climbed in his world, the more complicated things became. Her first taste of real danger came just a few days later when an unexpected confrontation occurred. She was sitting in Adriano's office, going through some reports when he walked in, his face hard, his eyes colder than usual. "We've got a problem," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any warmth. Emily looked up from the paperwork. "What kind of problem?" He dropped a file on the desk in front of her, and as she flipped it open, her eyes landed on a name she had seen before, Salvatore. "He's made a move," Adriano said, his tone darkening. "He's trying to muscle in on one of my deals. And it's time we show him exactly who's in charge." Emily's heart skipped a beat. Salvatore? The same man who had tested Adriano's patience only a few days ago? She had thought he would fall in line after that meeting, but now it seemed like he was making a dangerous play. "What are we going to do about it?" she asked, trying to hide the fear in her voice. Adriano's lips curled into a cold smile. "We make sure he understands that crossing me has consequences," he said, his voice low, almost menacing. "I'm sending a message, and you're going to help me." Emily was taken aback. "Help you? How?" Adriano's eyes locked onto hers, his gaze intense. "I need someone who understands the subtlety of power. You've been learning quickly, Emily. This is your chance to prove that you can handle the hard side of this business." She swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking in. She had always known that this life would come with risks, but now she realized just how serious those risks were. Salvatore wasn't just a rival, he was a threat, and Adriano was asking her to play a part in taking him down. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. Adriano's smile deepened. "I want you to go to Salvatore's office, get him talking, make him think he's won. You're going to use what you've learned about him to get him to reveal his hand." Emily's stomach churned. She had never thought of herself as a manipulator, but Adriano was asking her to do just that. To play a role, to deceive and control, all to maintain power in a dangerous world. But as she looked at Adriano, she realized that this was no longer about survival. It was about loyalty, loyalty to him, and to the empire he had built. "I understand," she said, her voice firm. "I'll do what it takes." Adriano nodded, pleased with her response. "Good. You're learning. Now, let's make sure Salvatore knows that no one can play in my world without consequences." The next day, Emily found herself sitting across from Salvatore in a dimly lit office. He was dressed in a tailored suit, his eyes sharp and calculating. He had no idea what was coming. Emily kept her expression neutral as they exchanged pleasantries. But underneath, she could feel her pulse quicken. This wasn't just a business meeting. It was a test. "I hear you've been making some bold moves," Emily said, leaning forward slightly, keeping her tone casual. Salvatore's lips curled into a smirk. "In this world, you either make moves or get moved," he replied, his voice low and confident. Emily studied him carefully, trying to read between the lines. She knew that he was testing her, just as much as she was testing him. "I respect that," she said, her voice smooth. "But you have to understand something. Adriano doesn't like being crossed." The mention of Adriano's name caused Salvatore's expression to flicker, just for a moment, before he regained his composure. "Adriano," he scoffed. "He's not as untouchable as people think." Emily's heart raced. She had to keep him talking, had to get him to reveal his true intentions. "Maybe not," she said, her eyes locking with his. "But if you keep pushing, he might just prove you wrong." Salvatore leaned back in his chair, clearly amused by her words. "You don't understand, do you?" he said, shaking his head. "Adriano has built his empire by being ruthless, but that doesn't make him invincible. It just makes him predictable." Emily took a deep breath, trying to control the rising tension. "And what makes you different?" she asked, her voice low, but steady. Salvatore's smile widened. "I'm smarter," he said, his tone oozing confidence. "And I know how to play the game better than anyone else." Emily's mind raced. She had to keep him talking, get him to reveal something. Anything that would give Adriano the upper hand. But just as she was about to push further, the door to the office opened, and Adriano walked in. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly, the air thick with tension. Salvatore's expression hardened, but he didn't say a word. Adriano's gaze flicked to Emily, and then to Salvatore. "You've made your move," Adriano said, his voice cold and controlled. "Now it's my turn." The silence in the room was palpable. Emily could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This was it. Adriano was about to take control, and there was nothing Salvatore could do to stop him. The room was tense as Adriano stood before Salvatore, his presence almost palpable in the charged air. Emily watched the two men, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been right there, standing in the middle of it all, watching as Adriano took control, dominating the situation with nothing more than his unwavering calm. Salvatore's smug expression had faltered when Adriano walked in, and now, as the silence stretched on, Emily could feel the shift in the room's energy. Adriano turned to her, giving her a small nod of approval before his focus shifted back to Salvatore. "You've made your move, Salvatore," Adriano said, his voice like ice, calm but dangerous. "And I'm here to show you why you don't make moves without understanding the consequences." Salvatore's eyes narrowed, but he remained silent, his lips pressed into a thin line. Adriano stepped closer, his gaze never leaving Salvatore's face. "You've been playing in my world, Salvatore, but you forgot the most important rule." Adriano's words were deliberate, each one cutting through the tension in the room. "This world doesn't belong to you. It belongs to me." Emily could feel her breath catch in her throat. The power Adriano wielded was undeniable, but what struck her the most was how effortlessly he commanded respect. It wasn't just his wealth or influence, it was the sheer force of his presence. Salvatore looked as though he was about to speak, but Adriano held up a hand, silencing him. "You've crossed a line," Adriano continued, his eyes cold and calculating. "And now, you're going to learn the price of that mistake." Salvatore's expression twisted with frustration, but he held his ground. "You think you can intimidate me, Adriano? You think you can just eliminate me because you feel like it?" Adriano's lips curved into a knowing smile. "It's not about what I feel. It's about what's necessary. And what's necessary is that you leave. Now." The command in Adriano's voice was unmistakable. Salvatore, despite his tough exterior, seemed to hesitate for a split second, as though trying to decide whether to push back or accept the inevitable. Emily couldn't help but watch the entire exchange unfold, a part of her still trying to process the power dynamics at play. Salvatore took a deep breath, his eyes flicking to Emily briefly before he spoke again. "You don't scare me, Adriano. You think you're untouchable. But I know people. People who can make things difficult for you." Adriano's gaze never wavered. I don't need to scare you, Salvatore. I just need to show you who really holds the power. There was a long moment of silence as the two men stared each other down. Finally, Salvatore made a decision. He turned on his heel, his face red with frustration, and stormed out of the room without another word. As soon as the door slammed behind him, Emily exhaled, her body suddenly feeling like it had been holding its breath. Adriano stood there for a moment, watching the door, his expression unreadable. Then, without warning, he turned back to her, his face softening slightly. I hope you were paying attention, he said, his tone light but firm. In this world, there's no room for hesitation. You either take control or you lose. Emily nodded, the weight of his words settling deep in her chest. She had always known that this world was dangerous, but seeing it in action, feeling the force of Adriano's power firsthand, was a wake-up call. I was paying attention, she replied, her voice steady. And I'm ready. Adriano studied her for a moment, his eyes scanning her face as if assessing whether she truly understood the gravity of what she was saying. After a long pause, he smiled, a slow, approving smile that made something inside her stir. Good, he said, his voice softening. Because from now on, things are going to get a lot more complicated. But I have no doubt you can handle it. As he spoke, Emily felt a surge of determination rise within her. She had already made the decision to step into Adriano's world, and now she was beginning to see just how deep this world ran. It wasn't just about business or power, it was about survival. And if she was going to thrive, she needed to keep up, to be just as ruthless, just as calculated as Adriano. She wasn't just going to survive in this world, she was going to make it hers. As the night went on, Adriano and Emily continued their conversation, discussing the next steps in dealing with Salvatore and the fallout from his failed attempt to take control. But Emily's mind wasn't on the details of the deal. It was on the realization that, for the first time in her life, she was truly in control of her own fate. The path ahead was uncertain, and there would be many challenges along the way, but one thing was clear, she was ready for whatever came next. Adriano had shown her the ropes, had given her the tools she needed to succeed, and now it was up to her to prove that she could hold her own. She had crossed the threshold into a world of power and danger, and there was no turning back. The days following Salvatore's exit from Adriano's world were marked by a growing sense of anticipation. Emily had proven herself during that tense meeting, but she knew it wasn't over. Salvatore's departure had been just a momentary victory, and as much as Adriano had assured her that they had taken control of the situation, Emily could feel the storm brewing. Adriano had a way of making everything seem effortless, his charisma and power commanding the room. But Emily knew better. She had seen the look in his eyes, the one that spoke of strategy, of calculated risks, of plans that reached far beyond the present moment. Adriano was always thinking 2 steps ahead, and now, Emily had to do the same. It was one thing to play the game, but it was another to master it. Over the next few weeks, Emily immersed herself in the intricacies of Adriano's empire. She met with influential people, learned the subtle art of negotiation, and began to understand the delicate balance of power that held everything together. But the more she learned, the more she realized just how much danger came with this lifestyle. As much as Adriano had promised to protect her, Emily knew that no one was truly safe in this world. There were always people waiting in the shadows, ready to strike when you least expected it. It wasn't just business anymore, it was about survival. And as the days passed, Emily found herself drawn deeper into the complex web Adriano had woven. One evening, Adriano invited her to a meeting with a group of his closest allies. They were gathered in a sleek, private room at one of his most exclusive properties. The air was thick with tension as Adriano discussed a new deal, one that had the potential to reshape his empire. Emily listened intently, taking mental notes on the names and faces of those in the room. Each person had their own role to play, their own strengths and weaknesses. She couldn't help but admire Adriano's ability to read people, to know exactly who to trust and who to keep at arm's length. But as the meeting wore on, Emily began to notice something unusual. The conversations became more heated, the atmosphere more charged. There was a shift in the room, something unspoken but undeniable. It was as if everyone in the room was waiting for something, waiting for Adriano to make his move. Emily watched him closely, noticing the subtle way his fingers drummed on the table, the slight narrowing of his eyes. He was always in control, but tonight, something was different. When the meeting finally ended, Adriano pulled Emily aside. His expression was unreadable, his jaw tight with tension. "There's a problem," he said quietly. "A few of my associates are beginning to get ideas. Ideas that could jeopardize everything we've worked for." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "What kind of ideas?" "They're starting to question my authority," Adriano replied, his voice low. "They think they can play me, take control for themselves. And that's something I won't tolerate." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. This was the reality of Adriano's world, the constant battle for power, the need to stay ahead of those who would try to bring him down. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the anxiety rising in her chest. Adriano's eyes met hers, and for a moment, she saw a flicker of something in his gaze, something almost vulnerable. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by his usual calm, calculated demeanor. "We're going to show them what happens when you cross me," he said firmly. "And I'm going to need you to help me do it." The words hit Emily like a punch to the gut. She had known this world was dangerous, but now, she was being pulled even deeper into its web. Adriano wasn't just asking for her help. He was making her an active participant in his world of power and influence. It was no longer just about being a bystander, observing from the sidelines. She was becoming part of the game. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the rush of emotions flooding her. Adriano's lips curled into a small smile. "I need you to convince them," he said, his voice low and purposeful. "I need you to show them that I'm not someone they can manipulate. And I need you to do it in a way that leaves no doubt." Emily's heart pounded in her chest. This was it, the moment that would define her place in this world. Adriano had given her the opportunity to prove herself, to show that she was capable of handling the pressure, the danger, and the power. She could feel the weight of his expectations pressing down on her, but instead of feeling overwhelmed, she felt something else, a sense of determination. She wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady and unwavering. "I'll make sure they understand exactly who's in charge." Adriano studied her for a long moment, his gaze intense. Then, without another word, he reached out and placed his hand on hers. The simple gesture sent a jolt of electricity through her, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to feel something beyond the business, beyond the power play. "I knew you had it in you," Adriano said softly. "You're not just surviving anymore, Emily. You're thriving." And in that moment, Emily realized that he was right. She wasn't just surviving. She was becoming someone new, someone capable of making her own mark in this dangerous world. She was ready to take on whatever came next. As the days passed, Emily found herself standing at the precipice of a life she had never imagined. The world she had stepped into, Adriano's world, was vast, full of shadowy corners, hidden dangers, and endless opportunities. She had proven herself time and time again, facing challenges that pushed her to her limits. But now, as the final pieces of a crucial deal began to fall into place, she realized that the real test was just beginning. Adriano's empire had grown, and with it, the risks. But Emily was no longer the woman who had once been abandoned by a man on her first date, unsure of herself and her place in the world. No, she had become someone else, someone stronger, someone who understood the delicate balance of power, someone who could stand beside Adriano and fight for what she believed in. The final confrontation was approaching. Salvatore, who had once tried to challenge Adriano's authority, had underestimated Emily, just like everyone else who had doubted her. She had taken control of the situation, gained Adriano's trust, and now, it was time to prove once and for all that she was not to be underestimated. She was ready. Adriano had called her to his office one last time before the deal was to be finalized. His expression was serious, the usual warmth replaced by a cool determination. "This is it, Emily," he said, his voice low but firm. "The final move." She nodded, feeling the weight of his words. "I'm ready," she replied, her voice steady, despite the anxiety swirling in her chest. "What do we need to do?" Adriano stood up from his desk and walked toward the window, looking out over the city. "We're going to take everything we've worked for and make it ours," he said, his gaze fixed on the skyline. "But we need to be strategic. Salvatore has been trying to move against us, and now it's time to end it. Emily felt a surge of determination. She had learned the game, and she wasn't afraid to play it. What's the plan? Adriano turned to face her, a small smile on his lips. You're going to take charge of the final meeting, he said, his voice calm, but filled with a dangerous undertone. You've proven yourself. You've earned their respect. Now, you're going to show them who's really in control. Emily's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The moment she had been preparing for. She had come so far, and now, she had the chance to take the reins. I won't let you down, she said, her voice steady with conviction. Adriano walked over to her, his presence imposing, but this time, there was a warmth in his gaze, an acknowledgement of everything she had achieved. I know you won't, he said, his voice softening. But remember, Emily, the moment you think you've won, the moment you let your guard down, that's when you lose. She nodded, understanding the weight of his warning. She had learned the hard way that in this world, nothing was ever truly safe. Let's do this, she said, her voice resolute. The meeting was set. Adriano's most trusted associates, the key players in his empire, would be there. Salvatore was not invited, but his presence was still felt. Emily knew that this meeting wasn't just about the deal. It was about asserting dominance. She had to make it clear that she was not just a side player in this world. She was the one who held the power now. The meeting room was filled with the usual suspects, sharp suits, cold eyes, and silent tension. Emily walked into the room, her back straight, her eyes scanning the faces of the men around her. They watched her with a mixture of respect and curiosity. It was clear that no one had expected her to take the lead, but here she was, stepping into the role she had earned. Adriano was there, standing by the window, his eyes never leaving her as she took her seat at the head of the table. Gentlemen, she began, her voice clear and steady. We're here to finalize what's been in the works for months. This is the moment we've all been waiting for, and I don't intend to leave this room until we're all in agreement. She could feel their eyes on her, the weight of their scrutiny, but she didn't flinch. She had come too far to be intimidated now. As the meeting went on, Emily's mind was razor-sharp. She saw the subtle exchanges of power, the small gestures that spoke volumes. She didn't need to raise her voice or make empty threats. She let her words and her actions speak for themselves. By the end of the meeting, the deal was secured, and the final agreements were signed. She had done it. Adriano stepped forward, his usual calm demeanor replaced with a look of quiet approval. You've done it, Emily, he said, his voice low. You've earned your place. This is just the beginning, but you've proven that you belong here. Emily felt a rush of emotions, pride, relief, but most of all, a deep sense of accomplishment. She had done more than just survive in this world. She had thrived. And as she looked at Adriano, she realized that they were no longer just business partners. They were allies, and perhaps something more. Thank you, she said softly, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. Adriano smiled, a genuine, approving smile. This world is yours now, Emily, he said, his voice filled with quiet admiration. And don't forget, you're the one who made it happen. Emily stood tall, the weight of her decision settling into her bones. She had started as a woman who had been abandoned, but now, she was the one in control. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, she felt ready to face whatever came next. In this gripping tale of dark romance, Emily's life takes an unexpected turn as she becomes entangled in a world of power, intrigue, and intense emotions. After being abandoned on her first date, she crosses paths with a mafia boss who seems to see her in ways others never have. As the dark romance unfolds, Emily finds herself drawn deeper into the dangerous world Adriano controls. This dark romance isn't just about the allure of forbidden love, but also about survival, manipulation, and the cost of power. With each decision, Emily steps further into the shadows of Adriano's world, unsure of who to trust and what sacrifices will be required. In this dark romance, Emily's transformation from a vulnerable woman to a powerful player shows how love can be as perilous as it is passionate. As she faces betrayal, unexpected alliances, and dangerous enemies, Emily realizes the depth of the dark romance she has become a part of. Will she be able to navigate this treacherous world, or will it consume her? This story of dark romance is full of twists, where every decision brings her closer to the edge of danger, but also deeper into a love that can't be denied.